What if I told you everything Hollywood ever showed you about cowboys and their guns was a lie? The low-slung, shiny holsters, the lightning-fast duels at high noon, the glamorous image of the gunslinger ready to draw at a moment's notice. None of it was real. In fact, the true story of how cowboys carried their guns is far stranger and far more fascinating than anything you've seen on the silver screen. From rugged leather rigs built to survive trail dust and rain, to bizarre shoulder holsters favored by gamblers, and even the legendary Doc Holliday, the reality is nothing like the movies. And here's my promise. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a Western the same way again. What you're about to discover will completely rewrite how you picture the Old West. Let's pull back the curtain and expose the truth. But before we continue, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. When the West was still wild and untamed, few cowboys dared to ride the open range without a trusted sidearm close at hand. Life out on the frontier was unpredictable. One moment, it could be a rattlesnake underfoot. The next, a coyote prowling nearby. For that reason, carrying a firearm wasn't a luxury. It was an everyday necessity. Cowboys quickly adapted, learning to live, work, and ride with their guns always within easy reach. But here's the thing. Those sleek, low-slung, quick-draw holsters we see in Hollywood Westerns? They weren't part of real frontier life. That dramatic image, the cowboy with his gun ready to be whipped out in a split second, was born decades later, crafted more by filmmakers and dime novels than by history itself. The cowboy, in truth, has always been a blend of fact and folklore. Over time, legends blurred into reality until the myths began to overshadow the truth. Much of what most people think they know comes from romanticized tales or silver screen portrayals painted with broad strokes of imagination. For example, real cowboys were far more likely to wear bowler hats than the towering Stetsons we picture today. And instead of flashy batwing chaps, they usually stuck with simple denim or wool trousers, clothes that were cheap, tough, and practical for long days of riding, roping, and grueling work across the open range. It's also important to understand there was no such thing as a single cowboy uniform. What a cowboy wore often depended on the region, what he could afford, and what actually worked best for his job. Fashion took a backseat to function. Still, one accessory remained constant: the firearm, and each cowboy had to figure out the most practical way to carry it. Now, about those first cowboy holsters. In the earliest days, many frontiersmen didn't even bother with holsters at all. It wasn't unusual to slip a small pistol into a coat pocket or tuck one into the waistband of a pair of overalls. But the harsh conditions of the frontier, dust storms, pounding rain, and endless hours on horseback, were unforgiving on exposed firearms. And loose carry methods didn't exactly mix well with the highly active, hands-on lifestyle of a working cowboy. Interestingly, the first real holsters weren't born in the Old West at all. Their roots go back to the military. In the 1830s, soldiers carried heavy flintlock pistols in sturdy leather pouches, built to hold the weight securely during long marches or while patrolling on horseback. These holsters were often strapped to the saddle pommel, keeping the weapon steady while riding. Over time, that practical military design was adapted and evolved, eventually giving rise to the first leather holsters that made their way onto the American frontier. When revolvers like the massive Colt Walker arrived in the 1840s, they were unlike anything most people had ever seen. These hand cannons tipped the scales at more than 4.5 pounds before you even loaded them. Strapping such a beast to a belt was simply unrealistic. Instead, holsters had to be designed specifically for saddles, which is exactly how U.S. cavalry troops first carried them. As America pushed westward in the mid-1800s, these saddle-mounted pommel holsters quickly spread beyond the military. Settlers, scouts, and civilians alike began adopting the same designs. Many of these early civilian holsters closely copied military patterns, sometimes even adding protective leather flaps to shield the gun from trail dust, pounding rain, and sticky mud. This quiet innovation marked the true beginning of what we now think of as the cowboy holster, a piece of gear built for practicality and endurance, not for the dramatic flair we're used to seeing in Western movies. But revolvers weren't the only weapons cowboys and frontiersmen carried. Alongside their sidearms, many depended on repeating rifles, especially the famous Winchester Model 1873, often celebrated as the gun that won the West. These lever-action carbines were short, lightweight, and perfectly balanced for life in the saddle. Cowboys usually kept them close at hand in saddle-mounted scabbards, sturdy leather cases that protected the rifles from harsh weather and rugged terrain while keeping them ready to grab in an instant. Through endless hours on cattle drives and frontier trails, skilled riders became masters at handling these compact rifles from horseback. Still, practicality often dictated carrying more than one gun. Many paired a lever-action rifle with one, or sometimes even two, Colt single-action Army revolvers. And there was a clever reason for this setup. Both firearms could share the same caliber ammunition. That meant fewer cartridge types to carry and less weight to haul. Now, carrying two revolvers might sound dramatic, but it wasn't about slinging lead from both hands at once. Instead, when one revolver ran dry, a cowboy could simply draw the second, avoiding the slow and painstaking process of reloading a single-action pistol in the heat of the moment. Even veteran buffalo hunters favored this method. They grew adept at smoothly switching between rifle and revolvers, especially when the rifle's magazine ran empty. Some men went even further, inventing clever solutions to keep their weapons at the ready. Leather slings and custom loops allowed a rifle to hang securely from the body, so a rider could drop it across the saddle while freeing both hands for his revolvers. One of the earliest written accounts of this technique comes from frontiersman and author William E. Webb. In his 1870 book Buffalo Land, Webb described how a carbine could hang from a shoulder strap, resting firmly across the saddle while the rider drew and fired his revolvers one after the other, before returning to the rifle as a backup. Webb observed that with enough practice, a skilled rider could fire off multiple rounds, reload while moving, and never once fall behind the pace of his horse. Between saddle scabbards protecting their rifles, revolvers chambered in the same caliber, and clever ways of carrying each weapon, these cowboys and hunters had refined a system built on pure efficiency. It wasn't about flashy theatrics, it was about survival. Ingenuity became second nature on the frontier, quietly shaping the daily realities of cowboy life and the history of their guns and holsters. Cowboys quickly discovered that efficiency was everything on the open range. A lever-action rifle secured in a saddle scabbard, backed up by one or two sidearms, gave them the flexibility to face long rides, cattle drives, or sudden threats with confidence. Many deliberately chose both rifles and revolvers chambered in the same caliber. That simple choice saved weight, conserved space, and meant fewer headaches when resupplying. Ammunition was a precious commodity, and in remote outposts, it wasn't guaranteed you'd find exactly what you needed. Standardizing their weapons wasn't just practical, it was essential. While the military had introduced holsters long before, it was the cowboy and the frontier traveler who transformed them into part of everyday life. A gun strapped only to the saddle wasn't always useful, especially when working cattle on foot or handling chores around camp. Having a sidearm right on the hip offered both safety and speed, and this need gave rise to a new wave of craftsmanship across the West. Saddle makers began designing specialized leather holsters that hung securely from a belt, allowing ranchers, wranglers, and trail riders to carry their revolvers comfortably and keep them ready at a moment's notice. These holsters were shaped to hold the weapon snugly, but not so tight that it slowed the draw. They struck the perfect balance between safety and accessibility, practical tools for people whose lives depended on being prepared. This evolution marked the foundation of everyday carry on the frontier, an innovation born not from Hollywood dramatics, but from the hard realities of life in the saddle. By the 1870s, a new style began spreading across the frontier, the Mexican loop holster, sometimes called the El Paso loop. Simple, durable, and dependable, this design quickly became a cowboy favorite. It represented a major step forward in how revolvers were carried on the range. Frontier saddle makers often crafted these holsters from a single piece of thick leather, sometimes recycling worn-out saddle fenders. One side of the leather was folded and stitched to create a molded pocket, perfectly cradling the revolver. The remaining flap was folded behind to form a flat skirt, giving the holster both structure and strength. To finish the Mexican loop design, saddle makers cut horizontal slits in the leather skirt and pushed the pouch through, creating secure loops that held the holster firmly on the belt. This kept the revolver stable and close, rather than swinging loosely below the hip. Sheriffs, wranglers, and trail riders alike could thread a belt through the loop, carrying their sidearm comfortably on horseback. Unlike Hollywood's flashy matched sets, real holsters and belts rarely matched. They were tools, not fashion. Cartridge loops sewn into belts appeared only after the Civil War, when metallic cartridges replaced cap-and-ball pistols. But these iconic cartridge belts had drawbacks. Exposed rounds collected rain, dust, and grit, often corroding ammunition. Many seasoned cowboys preferred small leather pouches to keep cartridges dry and protected. Function always outweighed flair. The earliest Mexican loop holsters were rugged but basic, stitched to fit the revolver and often covering most of the grip. Secure, yes, but awkward and slow to draw. Cowboys soon trimmed the tops lower, exposing more of the grip for faster access, especially while gloved or working cattle. Some even adopted the forward butt carry, as figures like Wild Bill Hickok reportedly did. This allowed cross-draw or underhand draw, far more comfortable from the saddle or in tight quarters. These modifications made holsters more practical, but they still bore little resemblance to the sleek, low-slung quick-draw rigs later seen in Hollywood. Those theatrical holsters, popularized in the 1950s by stars like Roy Rogers and Tex Ritter, were built for showmanship and stunt work, not survival. The truth is clear. Real frontier holsters were shaped by necessity, durability, and comfort. They were the working tools of cowboys and frontiersmen, telling a grounded story of daily labor, far removed from the glittering fantasy of the silver screen. By the 1850s, a new holster was making waves on the frontier, the Californian Slim Jim. Unlike bulky saddle-mounted pommel holsters, which were little more than loose leather sleeves dangling from saddles, the Slim Jim was slim, sculpted, and designed to hug a revolver's shape. A stitched belt loop allowed it to ride at the waist, while its open-top design made drawing far quicker than earlier enclosed holsters. For travelers and riders, it was both secure and accessible, whether on horseback or on foot. Though practical, the Slim Jim also carried an artistic touch. Many were decorated with floral tooling and stamped patterns, turning everyday work gear into personal style statements. It blended function, comfort, and design in a way earlier holsters had not, setting the stage for the Western holsters that followed. One of the more unusual carry methods of the Old West was the cross-draw shoulder rig, an early form of the shoulder holster. Positioned under the arm and angled for a diagonal draw across the chest, it offered comfort for long hours on horseback, trains, or stagecoaches. Smaller versions gained popularity with gamblers who needed their guns accessible at card tables where a hip holster would get in the way. Though modern audiences link shoulder holsters to sleek pistols of the 1980s, the concept dates back a century earlier. By the 1870s, examples were appearing on the frontier, often concealed under coats, ideal for scouts, lawmen, and gamblers who wanted discretion with quick access. One legendary figure associated with this method was Doc Holliday, who reportedly carried a pair of Colt Navy revolvers in a shoulder rig, a detail immortalized in countless stories and films like Tombstone. These early rigs show how inventive frontier carry methods truly were. Long before modern concealed carry laws, people of the Old West were already experimenting with balancing access, comfort, and discretion, shaping the real story of cowboy guns. During Hollywood's golden age, stars like John Wayne defined the cowboy image. Films such as Stagecoach, 1939, and True Grit, 1969, introduced audiences to the Buscadero holster, a low-slung rig designed for quick draws, often secured with a thigh strap. Unlike the practical hip holsters of the 1800s, the Buscadero was pure cinema, shaping how millions imagined real cowboys. Later refinements turned it into the modern fast-draw rig used in competitions, with spring steel supports and even rotating cylinders for speed. Yet such holsters were almost unknown on the frontier. The quick-draw cowboy was a Hollywood invention. This myth-making didn't start with movies. In the late 1800s, Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was already transforming frontier life into entertainment. With choreographed riding stunts, trick shooting, and flashy costumes adorned with silver conchos and polished holsters, everyday ranch hands were recast as daredevil performers. For audiences in cities and across Europe, these shows defined the West, even if what they saw was more fantasy than fact. When silent films emerged in the 1920s, they borrowed heavily from this theatrical style: silver-studded holsters, dramatic riding scenes, and larger-than-life gunslingers. Hollywood cemented these images for generations, leaving the public with a vision of the West that was thrilling but far from authentic. In truth, the real story of cowboy guns was about durability, not drama. From saddle scabbards and Slim Jim holsters to shoulder rigs and Mexican loops, frontier gear was built for endurance and practicality. Each piece told a quiet truth about survival on the frontier, far less glamorous than Hollywood, yet far more fascinating.